It's time for Supply Chain Now Radio, broadcasting live from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia. Supply Chain Now Radio spotlights the best in all things supply chain. The people, the technologies, the best practices, and the critical issues of the day. And now, here are your hosts.
Hey, good afternoon. Scott Luton here with you live on Supply Chain Now. Welcome back to the show. On this episode, we're going to be featuring a couple of supply chain leaders, especially from a sustainability and reverse logistics perspective. Stay tuned for practical insights and observations as we look to raise your supply chain IQ. On a quick programming note, like all of our series on Supply Chain Now, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts from, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, you name it. We'd love to have you subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Let's welcome in, speaking of our fearless supply chain leaders, let's welcome in our featured guest here today, Tim
Debus.
Debus.
Thank
you. Thank you very much. You saw the fear in my eyes for a second.
I saw you going there.
President and CEO of the Reusable Packaging Association. Tim, how you doing?
Good. Wonderful. Thank you. It's terrific to be here.
You know, it really is great to have you. I wish that we had recorded our pre-show conversation because I really enjoyed kind of getting your perspective before we even got started.
Wonderful. That was great to chat in advance, and obviously we could have had a podcast then at that time, but it's great, and maybe some of that will be repeated for the audience here.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sure it will. And joining you today is Mike Wasson, amongst other things, Chief Operating Officer with Tosca. Mike, how you doing?
Doing very well, thank you. Good to be here. Good to be back.
Repeat guest. We love our repeat guests. And as I was referring to your other roles, big industry contributor. On the board with the Reusable Packaging Association, I believe, chair of the board for the RPA for 6-7 months now in that role. Been serving the board for a few years now, so treasurer secretary I think prior to that, and chaired the operations committee for a little while, which was terrific, really getting a little bit more tactical, and now moving into the chair role last year. So I'm convinced, Mike, but based on those two roles we've talked about and others, that you've got clones somewhere deployed, and we just don't know. We're not smart enough to figure out when you're in three different places at once.
Yeah, first off, nobody in their right mind would clone me. I have far too many defects for that. No, you know, I am blessed not only on the RPA, but on the ASCM as well as at work at Tosca. Just blessed to be working with terrific people that pick up a lot of the slack and just do terrific work on my behalf, and I try to take some credit for it.
Agreed. Well, the industry's
agreed with me taking credit for the other people's work, or
well, the industry's better off for what efforts that you've got, that you lead and that you contribute, and we need people like that. We need especially practitioners, folks that know the industry, that are in the industry, because we all benefit and get better from that. So, looking forward to diving into both Tosca and RPA today and learning more there. But for starters, so Tim, we want to get into, before we talk shop, right? Before we dive into all things reusable packaging and more. Let's get to know Tim Debus a little bit better. So where are you from? Where'd you grow up? And you got to give us the scoop on that upbringing a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. And I always refer back that I'm a Midwesterner. I was born and raised in St. Louis, went to school at Indiana. Proud to claim to be a Hoosier.
Okay.
I spent 4 years there, and it was fantastic.
Y'all just had a big event with the coach coming back on campus, I think, for one of the first times in forever.
Bobby Knight, first time back in 20-something years.
It was fantastic. I was privileged to have gone to school there during Bobby Knight's tenure as head coach. In fact, they had just came off the year of winning the national championship. Did not repeat it while I was there, but certainly was a fan of his. There's a lot of great stories about Bobby Knight. We'll save them. Mine have been very positive, and see him back in Bloomington in the in the assembly hall there was really special for us watching, and it was terrific to almost to kind of bring it full circle, heal some wounds, and celebrate a great inspiration for the kids of University of Indiana and of course basketball fans around the world.
Love it. I've got to give a quick shout out to the biggest Hoosier fan that I know prior to meeting you, Jeff Smith, who lives out our way in Walton County. So he thought it was a very special moment as well, and it's really neat to see legends, kind of like I'm trying to think of some other sports folks that kind of drifted apart and then they get back together, and it's how it should be. So neat moment. So Midwesterner, born in St. Louis, went to Indiana.
That's correct.
While Bobby Knight was there, and then what?
Yeah, thank you. When I graduated, hadn't seen the sun for quite some time. I decided, we're going to change things. So headed out to San Diego.
Okay.
A good place to be, to see some sunshine and start a career. My background's in politics, actually political science. And went out there and looked for a job working in government affairs. And I was real fortunate to join a company of an agricultural biotechnology firm that was really breaking through with using genetic engineering to produce favorable traits in biopesticides and plant seeds to produce proteins, and in this case, whether it's biopesticides and toxins to kill pests or for other properties favorable for agriculture.
That's
really
some heavy-hitting stuff, by the way.
It is, and I'll spend it I was working at the ground level at this technology, and had a lot of fun at somewhat of an upstart company, breaking new ground, and I was in the regulatory affairs department, so getting the permits, the approvals to be able to commercialize those products. When that journey ran out, I thought, what really gets me excited, what really fires me up, where do I see myself spending a career, and decided to move all the way across country to get a master's degree in political management, so specialty in running political campaigns, public affairs, lobbying, and at that time was introduced into the trade association world. I joined United Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Association, a fantastic advocacy group for the fruit and vegetable industry. But there, my specialty and my role was actually managing the International Banana Association.
Okay.
So I worked with the North American banana industry, representing their interests, bringing them together, the principal players, to do things that are going to improve the industry. And really found that a lot of my skill sets, my interests in politics, diplomacy, I think Mike would agree, working with multiple groups, multiple interests there, and bringing them together for the common cause just was fascinating. And was there about 6 years. I had a great sense. I am indeed a banana expert, having spent time working on behalf of the industry, but I left that role, moved down to Tampa, Florida, where I am now, but joined a company that was in product development, and the first product assigned to me was develop a reusable plastic container for bananas.
And a star is born.
Yeah,
right there, right?
So I not only took the role I had as an industry representative, but took it all the way to the farm level and developed packaging products for bananas for distribution around the world, in particular the North American and European markets. So I was at the ground level and saw the supply chain of a very complex, very interesting supply of a perishable commodity, and this keeps bananas, all export products into the U.S., and really just was fascinated by all the dots having to be connected, but took the technology, took the innovation of packaging, and really understood what it took to bring that level of new product design and innovation into the business. And
so I got to ask,
sure,
do you still have plenty of friends and contacts at the banana trade group?
Actually, it's not as active as it used to be. It was a very small shop, really consisting of 7 companies.
Okay.
Right? 3 of them represent about 85% of the industry, and you know them by the brands as well. But terrific people. I really enjoyed the experience, and when you look at the time I've spent in Latin America and the people I met, they're so kind, and I was just able to accomplish some things and still, without being fluent, if not good at Spanish at all. They were able to work with me, and I just look back and thoroughly enjoyed that moment. So in the end, what I did is I took my interest in politics, public policy, my experience in trade association work, both with bananas, and I had spent time before with the Reusable Packaging Association as a member to that organization.
Right.
The position came up, and it just was a natural fit. So for me, it was not a straight line in my career. It was, but all the dots do connect jaggedly, but ultimately leading to the position I have today.
I love it. And I was going to add, you realize that they renamed the Savannah Sand Gnats the Savannah Bananas in minor league baseball. So big friend of the industry right down there in Savannah, playing good baseball. So that's really neat how your background kind of came together. That I'm sure serves you really well as you lead the Reusable Packaging Association, which we're going to talk more about what it does in a second. But my hunch, as we talk pre-show, is that despite all the growth and just how far the RPA has come, we're entering, thankfully for many folks, the golden age of probably why the RPA was founded. And how it's going to be able to serve more and more folks and companies.
You're correct about that. Interesting, last year was the RPA's 20th anniversary.
Okay.
When we talk about sustainability, when we talk about source reduction like reuse, and many folks think those are relatively newer developments in business and supply chains. But we've been the lead promotional arm of looking to reuse transport packaging for 2 decades now. And you're right. I often end my talks at shows and conferences that the best is yet to come.
Agreed.
And technology is enabling us to do things that we've never been able to do before to really optimize the value of reusable packaging. So, we look at technology and breaking through a lot of different industries. Ours is included in that, and allowing us to do more with reusable packaging and to improve those systems. So, I do believe, we're on the cusp of really taking reusable packaging, which has been around for a long time, but going to a whole different level of the opportunity with reuse and the value creation that it brings to those who are practicing with reusable packaging. We really have not seen, and for many of us, the vision of where this is going is still unknown. But
yes.
but favorably with trends that we'll talk about, and
yes.
It's pointing in the right direction. And
Agreed.
those members of the Reusable Packaging Association have been fantastic supporters and behind us in order to achieve those industry goals.
Agreed, and we'll talk more about that in a second. So, Mike, I want to bring you back in. Mike Wasson, COO with Tosca. Before we talk about Tosca, let's talk about. I've got a little appreciation for your background because we've had a variety of conversations. You've been on the show before, but for folks that might be new to Mike Wasson, where'd you grow up? And you've got to give us some of the skeletons in the closet with your upbringing too.
Yeah, I'm not a banana expert. Yeah, my background very different than Tim's. Grew up in Chicago, moved around the Midwest a little bit, but went back to college in Chicago at a small Jesuit university, degree in marketing, because first off, at the time, supply chain wasn't really a thing yet, right? Supply chain largely as a degree program didn't exist except in a few specialized universities, and where it did, it was a part of a program, either a business administration or a marketing degree. And I would say if I went back to school today and sort of my passion at the time and why I chose marketing was because I liked to understand how people think. And I probably would have done something like industrial psychology or one of the degrees that's available today. So degree in marketing, my very first internship back in the day, a long time ago, I interned for the VP of supply chain, of sales and operations was his job title. Yep. He was a part owner in a small company in Chicago. And my intent was to learn the marketing and sales side from him. And I found that I gravitated much more towards the shop floor, getting out on the floor and looking at how the materials flowed and how orders, went from a customer order through the supply chain, through the manufacturing process and the shipping process and managing demand and forecast and all that. I was much more interested in that side of the operation. So graduated with my degree, but then went right into a traditional supply chain role as materials manager, I spent 18 or so years in transportation in some form or fashion, working with some of the greater trucking and transportation companies in the country. Spent 6 years or so with the Coca-Cola company, which is the greatest marketing company in the world that just happens to produce drinks and stuff. And then for the past 5.5 years now, I've been with Tosca, and started in a VP of supply chain and operations role, and then about 1.5 years ago moved into the COO role.
So, going back to your internship, I think that is, you illustrate one of the very powerful and important components of why we need to have more and more internships, because despite what you study, despite the path and the trajectory you choose throughout tech school or university or you name it, until you're out in the environment working, you can uncover where your true passions lie. And there's so many different, it seems like to me, I'm not sure, maybe internships are on the way back. I know apprenticeships seem to be, there's a newfound value there here in Georgia. We talked this morning about some of the German-style apprenticeships that the state and other folks have gotten behind here in terms of supporting. But it seems like internships are so valuable, because you may not have been COO of Tosca,
I would not. And the reason I think internships are valuable, particularly in supply chain, right? Supply chain is a really broad career path. And if you think about, manufacturing, distribution, warehousing, demand planning, a lot of the artificial intelligence and IoT stuff really falls in the supply chain space. So many opportunities there that people don't traditionally think of as a career path. But boy, you can make a whole career out of just doing data analytics and still be in a supply chain role.
Yes.
So I think getting that internship and getting exposure to what the opportunities are and really starting to understand how you can leverage your particular passion and make a career out of it, really invaluable to not lock yourself into a degree program or career choice until you understand what's out there.
Yes, and one other vast generalization I will make here is it seems like academic programs are getting better at baking in a real practical element that helps students discover, where their passions, their calling, what they want to do. It seems like, again, a big generalization, but there's more than 500 supply chain management programs, degrees, whether it's 2-year, 4-year, doesn't matter. I mean, it's really grown dramatically. Okay, so now I want to switch gears back over to Tim, and if you could share with us, kind of in a nutshell, what the RPA does, why it was founded, and then we'll talk about where you spend your time.
Yes, our RPA is the Reusable Packaging Association is a nonprofit trade organization. The mission is to promote the use and value of reusable transport packaging products. As I mentioned, it was founded back in 1999 as really a coalition. Groups decided that we should get together, more or less Washington, D.C. based, to look at policy, work with EPA at the time, looking at reuse as a tool to be able to eliminate waste within the supply chain, look at systems approach to manage packaging. And so the founding was a smaller coalition that has since grown into a full association. And what we do is we bring our members together. We're a company based. We've got about 60 member companies. And fortunately, that they represent various sectors of the full supply chain. So while we have a lot of companies as members who actually design and manufacture and supply reusable packaging products like pallets, bins, containers, trays, we also have a lot of companies that are engaged into the services side of that full system, including the recovery, reverse logistics, technology providers, automation equipment providers. And so what we look as an association now is an organization that can truly represent and speak on behalf of the full reuse cycle. It's not just a forward supply chain organization of how you pack products and move them to the point of consumption or point of use, but what happens to the management of those assets and those products to be able to bring them full circle, allowing for reuse forward and back. And that's really where we see the significance of and the impact that we make is allowing for our members in our industry to promote that full reuse cycle and have expertise behind that to be able to work in the marketplace. What RPA does, for the most part, is to raise awareness about the opportunities with reuse, the education, exposure to different elements of the business, and use the educational platforms to be able to provide case studies and evidence and documentation, validation about reuse and the value that it brings to supply chains. And what we do is, working with the board of directors, is set our strategy of how we think we can make the most impact by working together as an industry on pro-competitive activities. So partners and competitors can come together to work together on ways that we can have a growth in the marketplace. We can have more impact as far as the competitiveness of reuse in a very competitive market in packaging. And we do things, whether it's trade shows, events, conferences. Mike mentioned a committee earlier. We have committee activities that focus on the food and beverage market, operations and logistics. And we work with public government affairs, trying to make sure that our regulators and legislators understand what reuse is and how that can be applied to policy as a tool to create favorable conditions, whether it's packaging, waste elimination, lowering greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera. So we execute with those programs and really every day think about how we can bring value to the members who are participating and bring them benefits of being in the organization that's going to be favorable for their business.
All right, and this is a neat episode because we've got a company that is a supply chain super competitor, a reverse logistics super competitor, and an organization that helps companies like that happen and grow, and also helps companies like Tosca that we're talking about share some of its best practices back with members in the industry and whatnot. So very interesting element here to this episode. Mike, tell our audience that may have missed your earlier guest star appearance on Supply Chain Now, what Tosca is, what it does in a nutshell, and gosh, all the growth that y'all have been seeing the last couple of years.
Yeah, so really exciting growth. So Tosca is primarily a supply chain company, but we manage a pool of reusable packaging. Our primary focus is around perishable food, so we spend time in the produce space that Tim referenced earlier, eggs, case-ready meat, poultry, seafood, things like that. We do dabble a little bit in non-perishables, and we're always looking for the right opportunity really to implement reusable packaging in any space where we think we can add value. Interestingly, when we were talking earlier about or I think you mentioned the golden age, at Tosca we talk about the reusable revolution, right? And if you think back through the history, there was the Industrial Revolution and I don't have nearly enough of a command of the American, but in the Industrial Revolution, right, it's when we started to introduce machinery to replace manpower.
Right.
What we think of the reusable revolution now is starting to introduce reusable packaging, not to be recycled, not to be thrown away, but to really revolutionize the space of transport packaging. And we do think this is the beginning of that revolution. There's been so much movement, I think, in other parts of the world where maybe the population density is a little bit different, the tax structure is a little bit different, but we think, particularly in the U.S., we're just at the beginning of that revolution right now. For Tosca, we're absolutely thrilled with the growth opportunity. We recently acquired a company called Polymer Logistics. Really excited about that, about bringing together two great organizations that we think actually share a very similar value set. We've been really impressed as we're bringing the two organizations together, and the value proposition that we both bring, thinking about stuff maybe just a little bit differently. And in the past, we had been competitors. In the past, we had both had opportunities to serve on the board with the RPA and see where we had commonalities and see where we had differences. But we've been now working for the past couple months on that integration and bringing those two great organizations together for the greater good.
So I got to ask, did that fellow boardship, for lack of better, did that help the process of the actual deal? It
did not. And again, for a couple of reasons, right? In the RPA, we are, I think, overly cautious around competitive
Sharing
nature
too
stuff,
much.
right? The antitrust implications. We don't talk about anything competitive, anything that could be even a little bit construed as antitrust violation, right?
Yeah.
So we had a sort of a friendly relationship and a healthy respect for one another. But yeah, that relationship through the RPA in no way. In fact, it actually, I would say, it maybe hurt because of the antitrust implications and because of the transaction. We steered clear of one another through the process.
I can relate. So I worked for a great company, Cisco Foods, way back 7 lifetimes ago, feels like. And it was drilled in our heads, even though we're coming into the kitchen as the competitors are walking out of the kitchen, you better not say hello. You better not ask about his or her golf game. But in there talking to the kitchen manager only for those exact reasons, right? Don't want any kind of slight notion that there's a antitrust issue. All right, so lots of growth, acquisitions, and I think maybe you've made a couple of acquisitions, I thought, or maybe I've got my wires crossed.
Yeah, really, just the one big acquisition. We have gone through some change of ownership or change of control of the primary private equity group that we work with.
Gotcha.
But yeah, really on a pretty solid trajectory. We're 60 and a half years old now, so we've gone through a lot. Don't know if you're thinking of some of those other things back in the day, but no, this is our first big acquisition here recently.
Hired a lot, been lauded as a employer of choice in the environment, right?
2 years in a row as best places to work in Atlanta, which we're excited about.
Which is where you're headquartered.
Which is where we're headquartered here in Atlanta.
Part of Supply Chain City. So. Gosh, what isn't going great at Tosca? I mean, it really it's striking to me that all of the growth in an industry that seems to just be entering into what's going to be a phenomenal time to be in the industry. So things are really looking good, Mike.
They are, and thank you for noticing. But it's an exciting time. Selfishly, it's a really exciting time to be at Tosca with all of our growth. I think the strategies that we've put in place, the leadership team is extraordinary, and I think we've got a lot of terrific stuff going on. It's also a really good time to be in the reusable packaging space as well, and I think we'll touch a little bit later on not just the focus of the RPA is primarily focused on transport packaging, right? So but there's a lot of alliteration in here. Predominantly secondary packaging, but the consumer push for more transparency in their supply chains and wanting to know where their food is grown, and they want to know the name of the cow that produced the milk or the name of the chicken that produced the egg and how it got to the table. And the reusable packaging, I think, enables that so significantly. The ability for reusable packaging to enable blockchain is tremendous, right? Because you have fixed assets that you can track much more easily than slapping a barcode on the side of a cardboard box.
So I want to move into a lightning round just for a minute, because we love asking executives where they spend their time, but we also want to get to some industry red meat, so to speak, right? So in true Reader's Digest form, tell us real quick where you spend your time as COO if you had to boil it down to a couple of areas.
Most recently integration, spending a lot of time on the people side of the business and making sure we've got the right folks in the right seats. Prior to the integration, I spend a lot of my time just on, I would call it sort of optimization, right? How do we make sure we're utilizing our assets well? How do we make sure we're creating a network that supports continued growth, a network that supports a customer demand, a network that lend itself to reusable packaging, right? So building out the infrastructure, making sure that we've got capacity and capability close to the point of customer demand, things like that. But a lot of time on that space. I've got a tremendous team that focuses on the day-to-day execution, making sure we're providing clean, food-safe containers in an ISO 22000 certified network so that the customers have confidence that they're getting a clean crate to reuse every time. Great people doing that every day, and allows me to spend time on the people side and on kind of optimizing the network side.
Love it. And same question for you, and thank you, by the way, Mike. Nice
Was that quick
tie
enough?
with a bow. It sure was. Tim, same role as President CEO of RPA. Where do you spend your time?
It's on execution. We've got a game plan mapped out for this year. I mentioned some of our core program areas. And we're not a big staff. We don't have resources at every turn to draw on. So we work very smartly, efficiently, in making sure that we can get in and deal with the details so that everything is seamless, whether it's at trade shows or conferences. Certainly the work that we do with the committee, writing white papers, bringing and talking about the standardization of the industry and those opportunities that come with it, and technology. So we want to execute. We want to very narrowly set a plan and deliver on that. That's what our board has assigned us to do. That's what our members are counting us to do. The one area that I really love to free up as much time is to go and get engaged with our companies, with our members, learn from them, see what they're challenged by, and then take that information and start molding it to a really an always flowing strategy. We don't sit idle as far as our strategic plan. In fact, we've talked about redoing it, but it changes frequently on how we want to approach the market. And I know strategy is something that's set, and we do that. It's something that we still work towards, but we want to be very nimble as well because of this rapid change in the business, because of the many different directions in which reuse is now taking turns to provide value in the marketplace and be able to capitalize on that.
Right. Well, in the industry, even the large shifts that are taking place, kind of one-directional shifts that are taking place across supply chain, still things change on a dime. Small little nuances of those big shifts. So being nimble, that's what is enabling so many small teams like you're referencing to not outplay, but can compete with the large firms, right? That is nimbility. Is that a word? Because we're going to coin it.
It is now. Yeah, I was going to add one thing too, maybe for Tim. So the RPA is a volunteer organization, right? So though the staff is small, the pool of volunteers is a lot larger, and I think Tim spends a fair amount of time cultivating the volunteer network and managing the ever-moving, ever-shifting schedules of all the volunteers and making sure that the staff and the association as a whole really provides value for all those volunteers and members.
That's such a great point. In this, and for members of our audience that may be a part of an association, or maybe they volunteer, or maybe they lead associations, you'll, I think, understand where we're coming from here. The volunteer landscape has changed so much, where volunteers are looking for that value proposition that you're speaking to, more so than I think ever before. Where I remember when I first joined certain associations, folks did things because it was out of habit or they just wanted to serve, right? That's not nearly as prevalent these days. So that's a tough job that Mike just spoke about.
Very much so, and I'm so cognizant of the volunteer time that I'm able to draw on, and I very much take that to heart in everything we do. In fact, time is the biggest resource that our membership can provide to the association. And so some may think I ask too much or reach out, but I try and find that happy medium ground as far as being able to have great engagement with the members, being able to have them participate in our program so they can take advantage of what we offer, and at the same time recognize that they've got day jobs. And we've got to be just careful. And one of the biggest challenges I have is scheduling meetings and bringing everybody together at the same time.
Yes.
So it can be cumbersome in the activities, but I tell you, it's a fantastic volunteer organization. Leaders like Mike and the board of directors that we have, that's the strength of the organization that we have, and being able to really take advantage and ultimately lead us into that next 5-10 years of the growth and the promise that we've talked about.
Yep. So on that note, you've already spoken to, both of y'all have spoken a good bit to kind of the role and scope of the Reusable Packaging Association in the industry. So let's kind of move to some of the macro trends and global forces that are influencing the space for across global supply chains. So speak to that, Tim. Let's start with you. Speak to that a little bit. Some of those major we were talking about earlier about those one-directional shifts. Speak to some of that.
Yeah, thank you. And we talk about the exciting times of reusable packaging. Unfortunately, the conditions that are being created or the forces that are moving are are not favorable for the environment, for the climate, for society, and that's driving the interest in reusable packaging. So when you look at some of these big forces and how companies and governments are responding, you've got climate change, right? The research and science community sounded the alarm and said, look, we've got another 10 years to not just address it, but change it, change behaviors. We've got a global solid waste crisis. The World Bank, estimates that in the next 30 years, there'll be a 70% increase in solid waste around the world as more developing nations becomes consumable nations. We've got a pollution problem where 8 million tons of plastic enters the ocean every year. So we're not managing our materials, certainly not to a sustainable, but even not to an economic benefit as well. And of course, the population growth, 2 billion more people that's expecting, mostly in the inner city areas, right? Urbanization is continuing to grow. So you have all these geopolitical and macro forces that are driving change. We're already seeing it with climate change and how that disrupts supply chains. Where we have more severe storms, you've got fires, and these changes are really affecting operations on a daily basis and probably more regularly in terms of the severity in which nimbleness needs to take place within the supply chain. So these are, I guess this is a good business in a sense of having these forces, everybody become more awareness that reuse is a better opportunity to address it. When you reuse a product, you're inevitably saving it from any type of waste. You're extending the life of that. And you're protecting it in a controlled business model so that it's not escaping from its management. It's controlled. So therefore it doesn't go to a pollution and it doesn't go to waste. So it's great to be on the solution side, but unfortunately the problems are pretty significant that we face out there. And governments now are moving to look at some really significant policy decisions, new laws, because industry and society hasn't figured out how to move more aggressively on this on ourselves. So you need to have these public policy tools to actually change behaviors. And so we're going to see more of that. In fact, I think in 2020, you're going to see some significant legislation from the state level here in the United States that's going to regulate packaging. It's going to place burdens or shift the burdens from the consumers, let's say, in terms of managing waste to the producers. And that's where it's going. It works. It's something that, again, is, from our perspective, when the reusable packaging can address all these conditions favorably, we know we're on the right step, and that's where these forces are causing more people to rightfully look at source reduction and reuse as a way to help and help mitigate some of these problems and get us into a better position where we're managing materials and allowing for that value to be extended and created through their use.
Yeah, I think some of what you're speaking to, that the point we've got to get to, is where at least folks are willing to stop and make a conscious decision about some of the decisions that otherwise are just habitual. That's where we've got to get to, and I think we're making progress in that regard. Mike, I want to bring you back in when you think of trends, global forces, some of the things that are making sustainability, reusable, recycling, all of these things more relevant. Anything we missed?
Yeah, I think the one thing we, Tosca, focus on a little bit more than what Tim referenced is really the labor climate too, right? So the one, I think, significant difference in reusable packaging, reusable packaging is standardized, right? It's typically a rigid but produced container, which means that it's easier to automate. It's easier to flow through an entire supply chain. It's much more predictable on cube utilization on a truck and square footage in a warehouse because it is very standardized.
Real quick, if I could,
yes.
'Cause I want to paint a picture for our audience and tell me if I'm wrong, okay? So everyone's been in a big box store. These big box stores, they always have at least one, sometimes two aisles dedicated to rigid plastic versatile containers.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they have separate lids. Sometimes they're integrated in the package. That's kind of what you're speaking to, right?
It is, and actually, in my opinion, if we do it well, and if the retailer executes well, you would never notice the packaging itself. When you go into the perishable food section, into the produce section, most of the retailers, it sort of looks like a farmer's market, right? All you really notice is the produce itself. Right. You don't notice the package that it's in.
Right.
You do notice it when it's maybe a center aisle. You'll notice cardboard boxes stacked up. You'll notice them bent and damaged, and but you don't notice the reusable packaging that's actually in the display itself, and that's by design, right? But the labor benefits, when it comes off of a truck in the container, that goes right into the shelf, right into the cooler. You don't need to restack it. You don't need to have a utility knife to cut boxes open. You don't need to worry about the damaged boxes and what happened to the perishable foods inside of it, because it's well protected. And again, it means it moves more efficiently through the supply chain, through the DC network, through the retail network, easier to automate because it's rigid plastic. Cardboard, for all its benefits, cardboard doesn't function really well in a wet environment. It absorbs moisture, which means it's harder to automate down conveyors and clamp trucks and things like that.
Sure.
So from a labor climate, I think that's where we get some attention differently than you do from the climate and the sustainable side of it, right? But if you can do all of that, which we do, and you can save labor and you can reduce damage, which is another key component of it. When you damage food in transit, you're contributing to the food crisis, right?
Sure.
1 in 7 Americans are food insecure. They're not 100% sure where the next meal is going to come from. If food is getting damaged on the way to the market, you're not helping with that situation at all, right? So through the adoption and continued use of reusable packaging, we can take food waste out of the equation as well, right? So fewer trips to the dumpster, fewer trips to the landfill. You're not throwing away or marking down food. You can be more efficient through the supply chain network. You can take in a really tight labor market, even at the retail level, you can have store associates that are spending time adding value, engaging with a consumer,
right,
instead of stocking a shelf, right? Because you can take it off the truck, put it right on display, meaning your associates are adding value instead of taking a box out of one thing and putting it into another thing.
Right.
And, not adding a tremendous amount of value. So I think that's a big difference too that we focus on, is that labor climate.
Agreed.
And just to add to that, Mike, is you mentioned a couple times design. How important it is to have a design that can, produce the results and can excel in all those different conditions that you mentioned. And that's what's so exciting about reusable packaging, is the design opportunity. Material sciences. Mike mentioned a couple materials, but in fact, when you're looking at reuse, it could be any material. It's something that is designed safely, that can be reused over and over again, and for its an intended purpose. That component of design and ergonomics for labor, specifications to fit with automation equipment, ventilation to help airflow and cooling to keep perishable product at a certain temperature to sustain and maximize shelf life. There's just so many components to design, and that's another exciting area that design sciences and the capabilities with technology, with 3D printing, faster to market, to from prototypes to commercial product. It's really going to accelerate reuse, and design is going to help us design for all those macro conditions that we talked about.
That's right. Let me. I'm going to throw a quote out at you here and see if Tim can name the author. But a great man said, "Design is the first signal of human intent." You know who said that?
I do. It's not Mike Wasson, though, so you didn't set yourself up.
It's not Mike Wasson, no.
Bill McDonough.
That's right.
Bill McDonough, who Cradle to Cradle of fame, and he's a fantastic advocate for this life cycle management. And you're 100% correct. Right. When you're looking at design, and his question is this all we can do? Is this the best we can do? Is this really
why
what
would
we
you design something that's intended to get thrown away when you use it once? That's right. And I think considered by many to be sort of the father of the circular economy movement and the sort of the sustainable supply chain as well.
As one of them, for sure, an early adopter, an advocate, and had much great foresight, I think, when he was writing and doing a lot of his work in this business.
And that's how we're going to realize the full potential. As we were talking pre-show, it's so much more than recycling. I've heard this phrase from a continuous improvement standpoint used pretty often, that culture is not enough, or engagement is not enough. I can apply that same thing here. Recycling is not enough. We're not going to recycle our way into a more sustainable environment. It's good that we do it, but to your point, we've got to get back into proactive design. Mike, as you said, not design something so it can be thrown away at a certain life component, but that cradle to cradle. I love that. That's the first time I heard that phrase. I love it. It makes so much sense now.
Absolutely. And, design, I guess one example that I recently came across in the news is you've got wind turbine blades, these big fiberglass blades, real strong, that some articles have come out that those are not recyclable.
Yes, I saw an article about this.
That, all these wind turbines now have these blades that are being replaced, but there's nowhere to go with them, so they're actually landfilling them. They're burying them.
I saw the pictures. They're stacked up. Parts of the same article, maybe.
So when you look at design, take a step back, as part of that product development, should have been designed for that product to have a end-of-life recycle capability or another use capability. But it's not. So we're in a situation now because the design stopped short at use and didn't think all the way through. And very similar to recycling, right? If we're designing items to ultimately be used one time, go to waste, and then recovered for recycling, are we doing enough at the design phase to maximize the value of the product and the resources put in to that product and its supply chain? And I would say no. In fact, this year in April is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day.
Okay.
1970 was the first Earth Day. Recycling has been around even longer than that. The Make America Beautiful campaign, or Keep America Beautiful campaign, that came out even in the 50s, really focused on recycling, right? Recycling is all the disposable, and let's recycle more. Well, we're 50 years into this consciousness, I think, of Earth Day, and we only recycle about 35% of the solid waste that we generate. And when you look at packaging, it's 30% of that solid waste. So 50 years of really an emphasis on recycling, and I can say that we're not very good at it.
Yes.
Now, we should get better at it, but clearly we've got to do more. We've got to think bigger about how we're managing materials. And when a material is waste, then we can be effective in terms of utilizing the materials and the resources that it contains to be able to extend the value of it.
All right, so I want to shift gears. This could easily, as many of the good conversations, passionate conversations can be, a 4-hour fireside chat, because we're not going to be able to give it enough due. But let's talk consumers. I believe that at some point, and I've put this out there before, that with all the e-commerce providers, all the boxes you get, despite our best efforts at shipping everything together, right? I hate when I get 17 boxes. I think there's going to be a really sharp entrepreneur out there that's going to develop like a home palletizer, right? and services are going to pick up nicely palletized, a little smaller scale than the grocery store, once a week, like we do trash and other recyclables right now. That's, e-commerce has got a long way to go before it's for most families, a daily delivery. But gosh, sometimes the holiday season, raise your hand if you weren't overwhelmed with all the corrugated laying around for a month and a half. So let's talk about consumers. Let's talk about one of the great forces that is making, to your point, this isn't new. This isn't a new movement. It's just got newfound, in many ways, beyond some innovation and newfound commitment. It's got newfound support and driving forces. So, Mike, I'm going to start with you on this notion. Consumers demand it. Not only are they aware of this, of reusables, recyclables, single-use plastics, all the different things, but they're demanding greener packaging, greener products, and transparency behind that, right?
Yeah, I think some consumers, right? I don't know that you can paint that with that broad a brush. Some consumers, it's nice to have. Some would like it if it's a cost-neutral proposition, right? But some say, boy, if you can have transparency here, or I can go over to this retailer and buy it for $1 less, and I'm not really confident where it came from.
Right.
We do see some of that, right?
That's right.
And, I think there is momentum in that space, though, where by creating that transparency and that visibility, it puts a little bit more pressure on the supplier, the manufacturer, and the retailer to be better at that process. And I think with that continued focus, not only will they be better at it, but they will find ways to be more efficient at it, which will help bring cost parity maybe to sustainably, ethically sourced products from the norm.
Yes.
Right?
Well put.
Whatever that norm might look like
Yes.
today. But I think it'll help drive some of that compliance, I guess, on the supply chain side.
Good point. Tim, weigh in on the consumer.
Well, certainly. I think as companies and products are adapting to more reuse models, I think that consumers will participate. The whole idea is to make reuse as convenient as the recycling program. The plus is that the reuse opportunity would bring a higher level value to enable that behavior to be in compliance as far as reuse, as far as bringing the product back. So when you're done using a product, instead of walking out, say, to your garage and putting it in your recycling bin for those who have the curbside recycling, you take your reuse bottle, you put it in the same similar bin, and then it gets picked up, like the operation. So there's not any additional inconvenience. In fact, if you tie technology to it, you can certainly make it much more effective as far as how consumers would order and return products. The other, though, as I'll go back to design, is that a lot of these new innovations at the consumer level are actually having product that has other benefits to it. Ice cream packages that are designed to keep the temperature of the ice cream cooler longer, and actually the beautification of the bottles, right? So just to say you've got detergents. What we want to do as consumers is buy the detergents but put them under the cabinet, put them away out of sight. With design, especially if it's built for reuse, you can design beautiful packaging. Your soap dispensers, that they're so nice that you want to put them on top of the counter because they add to the aesthetics, they add to this look and feel, and they're stainless steel and they're made with great components. So now all of a sudden, you're through reuse and the durability, is that you're putting more money into the product, but you're generating more value to the consumer that they'll want to participate in that program. Whereas single use, the whole idea is to how do we make it as cheaply as possible that there's no value to the consumer, so they'll either put it in recycling or throw it out. But it's enhancing the value through reuse, through durability, through the design of characteristics that's going to drive interest. It's going to drive that demand. That's to me, what's the secret. And then, of course, leveraging reverse operations that are either in place or can be created in partnership with companies, collaborations, so that it is very convenient to bring them back. To me, those are the components that is going to allow for reuse to hit at households and to be a very effective value creating product for the supply chain.
So this wasn't part of our planned conversation, but I just want to give you all a chance to kind of weigh in on this. We've got a regular series with the Reverse Logistics Association. We're big fans of Tony Schroeder and what they do to really help companies figure out not just reverse logistics, but returns. And returns is such a big aspect of sustainability, especially as consumers are now it is our God-given right to return whatever we want to return, it seems like, right?
That's right.
And folks and surprise, surprise, consumers are returning it, right? But companies are struggling with what to do with returns, especially if it's a highly brandable item. A lot of those returns are getting destroyed because of brand integrity concerns. Anything you want to comment on the return side of e-commerce and consumers?
Yeah, you've got really two parts. The return is the physical inventory that companies take back. And so there's the logistics of getting that product to returned and accounted for in order to have that inventory in place. But I'd like to look at returns as a way to be able to repurpose, resell, those products that are returned and have a secondary market take shape that could either be discounted or a way to be able to save money, satisfy the consumer returning it, that they're able to maybe get a different size product or they decide they no longer want it. But to have a product that's very saleable, it's very marketable to a secondary buyer, and that is somewhat of a whole reuse market as well, right? It's not inventory that's damaged and should be thrown away. It still has value. So how do you market the opportunity for that value to be achieved and realized by another consumption pattern area? And maybe this is where you have collaboration at that level, is allowing for returns to come in the logistics behind it to be able to have more volume-driven efficiencies created with those returns. And, of course, use packaging that could be reused over and over again so that it's not a waste-generating practice.
I have returned exactly 2 things to Amazon in my entire career. And that is juxtaposed against my wife's record, which we won't get into numbers. But it really, once you find out more about how companies are struggling with returns and what really happens to them, and now the cool thing is what I've learned in recent months is it's creating this niche market of liquidation, and you see more and more folks buying pallets of return items and they don't know exactly what's in there. Sometimes they can reclaim things and then sell it again. It is absolutely fascinating to see all the different facets and dynamics that's involved in this effort to get better and better, get more sustainable. And of course, what y'all are doing, I really applaud what y'all are doing at the RPA, because packaging is such a big part of that. You were speaking to it earlier in terms of the power of packaging, and I promise you, most folks probably don't even realize the behaviors that packaging of how it influences them.
Yeah, it's the platform in which products move to point of sale or point of consumption. We all receive products that come or can in some type of reusable packaging, and so that's where it's important to look at that platform and so many different ways that platform can contribute to other parts of the supply chain, whether it's data transmission with using technology for location, for condition. And provide for better inventory management as well. If you're aware of where that product is and how fast it's moving, you can have more predictive analysis in terms of managing that inventory. So maybe that also helps with returns.
Yes.
Provide more of an expectation in your algorithms of how products and when products are going to get returned, and all about that data utilization.
Once packaging can figure out how to guilt the consumer of keeping the product, we really got into 4.0.
I got to tell you just really quickly, I was behind in line at a club store. A woman who was returning, I don't know exactly how many, several gallons of ice cream because she had bought too much for whatever event she had. And as an advocate for reuse and an advocate for sustainability, I was troubled at how she expected the club store to absorb her error, right? But because there's no way you can take, it was 5 or 10 gallons of ice cream that she just bought. I'm envisioning, a kid's birthday party or something. Right. But she's returning it to the store and expecting them to say, "Oh, yep, got it. We'll give you all your money back, and we'll just go resell it." Right? And that can't be resold. So I think there is a guilt component that has to come into play here.
I agree.
Right? We have to drive better consumer practices, better behaviors, a better understanding of the negative impact of making poor choices. Right? They need to understand how reuse versus recycle versus landfill impacts the bigger picture, right? Yeah. And until we do a better job of education, I'm not sure we're going to get there. You can get it either through education or through, we started to touch on this earlier, government legislation or regulation or taxation or incentives for reuse versus landfill, things like that.
At some point, it's going to be at a cost,
right?
Because municipalities aren't going to be able to run the recycling programs. So if they are, they're going to have to charge consumers with the cost of waste. This is not unheard of. That's going to hit the pocketbook. And we just can't keep offering free waste management. And so as those costs increase and ultimately are incurred by the consumer, Mike, I do think that that may help with this awareness and behavior change to go to more sustainable options.
Because I have seen the garbage truck come through my neighborhood, and we do separate. We've got a landfill and a recycling, and I have seen where they dump both of them into the same hopper, right?
Yeah.
Which tells me that the efforts that we've gone to have maybe been less than fruitful.
Well, let's not kid ourselves. There's no such thing as free shipping, and there's no such thing as free returns. There's not.
It's
Someone's paying.
Prepaid.
That's right. All right. I hate to bring this conversation to a close, but I do want to make sure two points here that folks know how to reach back out and learn more about the RPA and Tosca. So, Tim, how can folks learn more about your organization?
Sure. Best place to go is reusables.org. Reusables.org. It's our website. All the information. Again, it's more of an education, website about how to reuse, why reuse. We've got our contact information there. We continue to focus on the website as the hub of information that we generate, and so we're always adding new items, new content, new perspectives. Our members are all listed on the website. We've got videos of some of our education sessions that are open for people to view. So we'd encourage those interested in learning more about reuse, especially with transport packaging, but also about the organization and what we do and how to become involved. Reusables.org is the best place.
Yep, love it.
Can sign up to be a member online as
That's
well.
Right.
We would love to drive some greater participation there and get broader perspectives in the RPA too.
Love it. And Tosca, Mike, how can folks kick the tires more on Tosca?
Yep. ToscaLTD.com. And there's a spot on there to, I forget what it says now, but, contact us and it will go through the channels and wherever it is intended to end up. So if you're looking to send me a message, if you click on there and put this message is for Mike, it'll route to me directly through the IT folks. Great information on there as well. We've got supply chain calculators so you can evaluate the right decisions and how a reusable program can benefit your company. It has a little bit more detail on the different industries that we serve and the retail and supplier partners that we work with. So if you do want to be a responsible consumer and you want to understand retailers and suppliers that are participating in a robust reuse network, you can go on there and see who they are and then make your buying decisions accordingly.
Nice. Very nice. Okay, I want to mention Modex real quick as we wrap up. I know that RPA is collaborating well with MHI, the incredible, powerful team behind Modex, which, as our listeners will know, the largest supply chain trade show in the Western Hemisphere, 35,000 people right here in Atlanta. So tell us about, Tim, y'all's involvement with Modex just a few weeks away.
Yeah, RPA is hosting the Sustainability Theater. It's an on-floor theater that's being built by our pavilion area that's going to focus more on sustainability topics with supply chain and materials management. We've got 12 sessions that are lined up to talk about sustainability and how companies are looking to drive more sustainable practices. But there's going to be a nice weight of reuse discussions, including a panel discussion that Mike's going to serve on along with some of our other board members to talk in more detail about
Did I know I was doing that?
Yeah. Well, I've got the sign-up form for you after here. I'm going to make sure, but we're excited. It's a great forum. We love working with MHI and the partnership, and they are definitely supportive of the reusable messaging, the broader sustainability theme at their show. They're giving us a chance to lead that effort at this year's show coming up in March. So we're going to give it a shot, and we hope that those attending will come by and say hi and sit into a session or two and pick up some great insight related to sustainable and reusable packaging.
Love it. And we're big fans of Modex and the MHI as well. We're going to be broadcasting throughout the 4 days at Modex. And by the way, the listeners, Modex is free to attend, modexshow.com. Also, as the great folks over at Tosca know, who's one of our community sponsors, they're hosting our 2020 Atlanta Supply Chain Awards on March 10th there at Modex at the Georgia World Congress Center. And I think they're taking every available room. It's huge. It's massive. Okay.
Yeah, not good for traffic, but great to continue
right.
to establish Atlanta as the supply chain capital of the world.
That's right. Atlanta, it's sacrifices we make to proliferate all those supply chain best practices, right? Okay. Really appreciate Tim and Mike's your time. Just a real quick note as we wrap up here to our audience. Be sure to check out our events and webinar tabs at supplychainnowradio.com. We've got a variety of in-person and virtual events coming up with partners around the world, from EFT Reuters events to the Automotive Industry Action Group, the Georgia Logistics Summit, DHL Resilience 360, Modex, as we mentioned, much, much more. And if you can't find something you're looking for, if you've got a question, we don't have a really cool AI drone waiting to route, but you can hit up our Chief Marketing Officer at Amanda@supplychainnowradio.com, or send me a tweet over at Scott W. Luton, and that's Luton, and we'll see if we can't serve as a resource for you. Okay, big thanks to our guests today. Great conversation. I hate that we couldn't get to as much as we'd like to, but we'll have you back. Both of y'all back, and we'll talk more about this ever-evolving, highly influential and really important world, all things sustainability and certainly reusable. Tim Debus, President and CEO of the Reusable Packaging Association. Tim, thanks so much.
Thanks, Scott.
And Mike Wasson, Chief Operating Officer of Tosca, amongst other things. Mike, always a pleasure.
Always. Thank you very much for having me back.
You bet. Be sure to check out other upcoming events, replays of our interviews, other resources at supplychainnowradio.com. You can find Supply Chain Now wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe as we are rolling out new subscriber rewards very soon. On behalf of the entire team here, Scott Luton, wishing you a wonderful week ahead, and we will see you next time on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.